They say the coldest hearts are forged in the hottest fires. But what happens when ice meets innocence? Christmas Eve in Seoul. The city glitters like a jeweled box, wrapped in colored lights and the laughter of families gathering for warm dinners. But beneath the festive shimmer runs another world, one where deals are brokered in blood, where loyalty is currency, and where one man's name is whispered like a curse in smoke-filled rooms. The ghost of Gangnam. He walks alone through the alley behind his nightclub, breath misting in the frozen air. His $5,000 wool coat cuts a sharp silhouette against the falling snow. The numbers from tonight's accounts are perfect in his mind. Everything calculated, everything controlled, everything exactly as it should be. His phone buzzes. A meeting in 20 minutes. Another deal, another consolidation of power. He should keep walking. Then he hears it. A sound so faint it's almost swallowed by the whisper of snow hitting concrete. A whimper, weak, desperate, dying. His feet stop. He doesn't know why. Between a dumpster and a frozen wall, nearly invisible against the dirty snow, is a puppy. Not just cold, freezing to death. Its tiny body trembles violently, each breath a visible struggle. Dark fur matted with ice, eyes barely open, clouded with the fog of hypothermia. A Jindo puppy, Korea's most loyal breed, abandoned like trash on the holiest night of the year. For 3 seconds, the most feared mafia boss in Seoul stands perfectly still. His hand, the same hand that has broken bones and signed death sentences, hovers in midair, trembling. Because suddenly, he's not 38 years old, he's 8. Winter, 1993. Orphanage steps, his mother's back disappearing into the snow, the cold seeping into his small body, the devastating moment when he understood what unwanted meant. The puppy's eyes open slightly, meeting his. There's no fear in them, just quiet acceptance of death. The same look he'd seen in his own reflection that night in a frozen puddle 3 decades ago. His jaw clenches. Something in his chest, that muscle he convinced himself was just scar tissue, cracks. Aish! The curse breaks from his lips like a prayer. He drops to his knees in the dirty snow, and the man who stopped feeling 30 years ago reaches out with shaking hands toward a life that's slipping away. He doesn't know it yet, but this moment, this choice, will shatter everything. His empire, his reputation, his carefully constructed armor. Because in his world, compassion is a death sentence, and he just showed mercy. The clock is already ticking, his enemies are already watching, and the ghost of Gangnam is about to discover that the most dangerous thing in the world isn't showing weakness, it's remembering what it feels like to be human. Before the fall. Seoul, South Korea, December 24th, 11:47 p.m. This is not a story about redemption. Not yet. This is a story about a man who forgot how to bleed, who trained himself to feel nothing, want nothing, need nothing, because needing anything in his world meant giving someone the weapon to destroy you. They called him the Ghost of Gangnam, and the name fit like a second skin. 38 years old, 6 feet of coiled violence wrapped in designer suits, a scar tracing his left eyebrow, not from gang warfare, but from his father's belt when he was 8, the night he decided tears were a luxury he could no longer afford. He built his empire from ash and broken promises, clawed his way up from the orphanage steps where his mother left him to freeze, transforming abandonment into ambition, pain into power, trauma into an empire worth millions. By 25, he controlled half of Gangnam's underground. By 30, he was untouchable. He'd learned the rules early. trust no one, feel nothing, survive everything. For 30 years, it worked. His penthouse overlooked the Han River, all glass and chrome and expensive emptiness. His closet held 50 tailored suits, but no photographs. His bed was king-sized and always cold. He had hundreds of men who'd die for him, but not one he'd call friend. He preferred it that way. Emotions were liabilities, attachments were weaknesses, love was a bullet waiting to find your heart. He'd watched men fall because they cared too much, about family, about honor, about some woman who smiled the right way. He'd sworn he'd never be that stupid, never be that vulnerable. And he wasn't. Until the night he heard a sound that shouldn't have mattered. A whimper in an alley, a dying puppy in the snow. Something so small, so insignificant, it should have been easy to walk past. But here's what they don't tell you about becoming a monster to survive. You have to kill the child you once were, bury him so deep that nothing can resurrect him, build walls so high that no cry for help can penetrate them. The ghost had done exactly that. He'd buried the 8-year-old boy on the orphanage steps, covered him in concrete and crowned him with violence, made sure that terrified, abandoned child could never claw his way back to the surface. But on Christmas Eve, in a frozen alley behind a nightclub, that boy heard something that sounded like his own voice from 30 years ago. And before the ghost could stop him, before armor could slam back into place, that buried child reached out. This is the story of what happened when a man who'd forgotten how to feel stumbled upon something that reminded him of everything he'd lost, when Seoul's most dangerous criminal made a choice that would shock his enemies, confuse his allies, and force him to confront the simple, devastating truth he'd spent 3 decades running from. You can't kill the child you once were. You can only decide if you'll save him. The question is, at what cost? Welcome to the night the ghost learned that some rescues are mutual, that sometimes when you reach down to save something fragile and dying in the snow, you're really reaching back through time to save yourself. But in a world where compassion is currency for death, where mercy is blood in the water, and where showing your heart means handing your enemies a target, salvation might be the most dangerous thing he's ever attempted. The clock reads 11:49 p.m. In 11 minutes, it will be Christmas. In 20 minutes, everything will change. And the man who stopped feeling 30 years ago is about to discover that the opposite of love isn't hate, it's ice. And ice eventually always breaks. Before we begin this story, I need to tell you something important. YouTube suspended our main channel without warning, without reason, without giving us a chance to explain. Years of work, hundreds of stories that touched millions of hearts, gone in an instant. We're starting over, from zero. And honestly, we're heartbroken, but we're not giving up. Here's the truth. The only way we can keep bringing you these powerful stories, stories that make you feel, that make you think, that remind you what it means to be human, is if you help us rebuild. Every subscription is a vote of confidence. Every like tells YouTube we deserve to exist. Every comment proves there's an audience that wants meaningful content, not just mindless noise. So before you hear the story of the ghost of Gangnam and the dying puppy he found in the snow, I'm asking you, person to person, heart to heart, hit that subscribe button. It's free. It takes 2 seconds, but for us, it's everything. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story, because YouTube won't promote us. They won't give us a second chance. Only you can do that. This isn't just a request, it's a lifeline. And if this story moves you, even a little, show us by dropping a comment. Tell us what you felt. Share your own experiences. Let us know we're not shouting into the void. We lost everything once. Please, don't let us lose it twice. Now, let's begin. Before we begin this story, I need to tell you something important. YouTube suspended our main channel without warning, without reason, without giving us a chance to explain. Years of work, hundreds of stories that touched millions of hearts, gone in an instant. We're starting over, from zero. And honestly, we're heartbroken, but we're not giving up. Here's the truth. The only way we can keep bringing you these powerful stories, stories that make you feel, that make you think, that remind you what it means to be human, is if you help us rebuild. Every subscription is a vote of confidence. Every like tells YouTube we deserve to exist. Every comment proves there's an audience that wants meaningful content, not just mindless noise. So before you hear the story of the ghost of Gangnam and the dying puppy he found in the snow, I'm asking you, person to person, heart to heart, hit that subscribe button. It's free. It takes 2 seconds. But for us, it's everything. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Because YouTube won't promote us. They won't give us a second chance. Only you can do that. This isn't just a request, it's a lifeline. And if this story moves you, even a little, show us by dropping a comment. Tell us what you felt. Share your own experiences. Let us know we're not shouting into the void. We lost everything once. Please don't let us lose it twice. Now, let's begin. They called him the Ghost of Gangnam, and if you were smart, you never said his real name out loud. At 38 years old, he'd perfected the art of being everywhere and nowhere, a shadow that controlled half of Seoul's underworld without ever raising his voice. His empire ran on fear, precision, and one unbreakable rule: never show weakness. But here's a question for you. Can a man truly live without feeling anything? Or is he just slowly dying in a body that refuses to stop breathing? The scar above his left eyebrow told a story he never shared. Most assumed it came from gang warfare, some brutal fight that earned him respect. They were wrong. It came from his father's belt buckle when he was 8 years old, the night he learned that crying only made the pain last longer. That was the night he stopped being a boy and became something else, something harder, colder, untouchable. His penthouse overlooked the Han River, floor-to-ceiling windows framing a city that glittered like broken glass. 50 tailored suits hung in his closet, each one worth more than most people earned in a month. But there were no photographs on his walls, no family portraits, no reminders of the orphanage steps where his mother left him on a winter night in 1993, her face wet with tears as she walked away because things got too hard. What would you have become if the person who was supposed to love you most chose to abandon you in the freezing snow? His second-in-command, Jung-ho, often wondered if the ghost even slept. Every morning at 5 a.m., he was already in his office, reviewing accounts with a precision that bordered on obsession. Every number had to be perfect. Every deal had to be airtight. Control wasn't just important, it was oxygen. The moment you lost control, you lost everything. That's what happened to the men he'd watched fall. They got sloppy. They fell in love, or worse, they started caring about something more than survival. He'd seen grown men weep over dead brothers, crumble over betrayed lovers, break over sick children. And every time, their enemies found that crack and hammered a blade right through it. So he felt nothing, wanted nothing, needed no one. It was safer that way. On Christmas Eve, while families gathered for warm dinners and children tore open presents, the ghost closed another deal in his nightclub's private room. The man across from him was sweating despite the winter cold, desperate to negotiate better terms. The ghost simply stared, his expression carved from ice, until the man agreed to everything. No raised voice needed, no threats, just the weight of his presence, the reputation that preceded him like winter frost. Do you think it's strength to feel nothing? Or is it the ultimate form of cowardice, hiding from pain by refusing to be human? By 11:30, the club was closing. His men filtered out, disappearing into the snowy night like ghosts themselves. The ghost walked alone through the back corridor, his $5,000 wool coat sharp against the falling snow, mentally reviewing the evening's numbers. Perfect. Everything was always perfect in his carefully controlled world. His phone buzzed. Another meeting in 20 minutes. Another consolidation of power. Another brick in the wall he'd built around the terrified 8-year-old boy still trapped somewhere inside his chest. He should have kept walking toward his car, but then he heard it. A sound so faint it almost dissolved into the whisper of snow hitting concrete. A whimper. Weak, desperate, dying. His feet stopped, and for the first time in 30 years, the ghost felt something crack in the frozen wasteland where his heart used to be. What he saw next would change everything, but the real question is, was he ready for what that change would cost him? Between a dumpster and a frozen brick wall, nearly invisible against the dirty snow, was a puppy. Not just cold, dying. Its tiny body convulsed with violent tremors, each breath a rasping struggle against the inevitable. Dark brown fur matted with ice crystals that glittered like diamonds in the alley's dim light. Eyes barely open, clouded with the fog that comes right before death whispers your name. A Jindo puppy, maybe 8 weeks old, Korea's most loyal breed, bred for centuries to never abandon their masters, now abandoned like garbage on the holiest night of the year. The ghost stood frozen, staring down at something so small it could fit in one of his hands. Hands that had broken bones, signed death warrants, pulled triggers without hesitation. Why didn't he just keep walking? His brain screamed the logical answer. He had a meeting in 18 minutes. This wasn't his problem. People died in alleys every night in Seoul. Why should one dying animal matter? In his world, sentiment was suicide. Compassion was a bullet with your name on it. But his feet wouldn't move. Because suddenly, he wasn't standing in an alley in Gangnam. He was 8 years old, sitting on frozen orphanage steps in Busan, watching his mother's back disappear into the snow. The cold seeping through his thin jacket, the devastating understanding that he was unwanted, disposable, left to freeze because he was too much trouble, too expensive, too difficult for a woman who decided her own survival mattered more than his. He remembered the way his small body shook, not just from the December cold, but from something deeper, the kind of cold that comes from knowing you're utterly alone in a world that doesn't care if you live or die. If someone had walked past him that night without stopping, would you blame them, or would you call them a monster? The puppy's eyes opened slightly, meeting his. There was no pleading in them, no desperate hope for rescue, just quiet acceptance. The same look he'd seen in his own reflection that night, in a frozen puddle that mirrored his small, abandoned face. His jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. Something in his chest, that muscle he'd convinced himself was just scar tissue, incapable of feeling, cracked like ice breaking on a river. Aish! The curse escaped his lips, a prayer and a surrender all at once. His hand still trembling. When was the last time his hands trembled? Reached toward the puppy. The moment his fingers touched the frozen fur, memory exploded through him like a gunshot. Winter, 1993. A boy named Minho found him on those orphanage steps. Didn't say a word, just took off his own jacket, the only warm thing he owned, and wrapped it around the ghost's shaking shoulders. Sat beside him until morning, two abandoned boys keeping each other alive through sheer proximity. Minho died 3 years later in a gang fight, his body dumped in an alley not unlike this one. The ghost never forgot. What makes us choose compassion when logic says to walk away? Is it strength? Foolishness? Or is it the echo of every time someone showed us mercy when they didn't have to? The ghost dropped to his knees in the dirty snow, his expensive coat dragging through slush and trash. His hands, those instruments of violence, frantically worked to free the puppy from its icy prison. The tiny body barely responded, life flickering like a candle in wind. "Stay with me," he heard himself whisper. When was the last time he'd asked anything of anyone? When was the last time he'd begged? He pulled off his $5,000 coat and wrapped the dying puppy inside, pressing the small body against his chest, trying to transfer his own warmth into frozen limbs. His white shirt soaked through with melted ice and grime, his knees wet and cold against concrete. The most feared mafia boss in Seoul, kneeling in filth, begging a dying animal to live. His men would find him like this in 15 minutes. His reputation would crack. His enemies would hear the story and smell blood in the water. But in that moment, with that fragile life trembling against his chest, none of it mattered. Because for the first time in 30 years, the ghost remembered what it felt like to care about something more than survival. And that realization terrified him more than any enemy ever had. Jung-ho found him 23 minutes later, completely by accident. He'd come back for his forgotten keys and heard sounds from the alley, sounds he couldn't quite identify. When he turned the corner, his brain refused to process what his eyes were seeing. The ghost, on his knees, in the snow, coat discarded, hands covered in ice and grime, and cradled against his chest, wrapped in what looked like his shirt, was something small and trembling. "Boss?" Jung-ho's voice cracked with confusion. In 15 years of service, he'd never seen his boss show anything resembling emotion, not during torture sessions, not when rivals begged for mercy, not even when they'd barely survived an ambush that left 3 men dead. The ghost's head snapped up, and Jung-ho took an involuntary step backward. Not because of anger, he could handle the ghost's rage. It was something else in those eyes, something raw and exposed and almost human. "Call my personal doctor." The ghost's voice was steel, but his hands, impossibly, incredibly, were gentle as they adjusted the bundle against his chest. "Now." "Sir?" Jung-ho glanced at the bundle, finally understanding. "It's dying." The ghost cut him off, and for a split second, Jung-ho saw something he'd never seen before. Not rage, pain. "Call the doctor. Tell him I'll pay whatever he wants. Just get him to my penthouse in 15 minutes or find me a new doctor." Would you risk your reputation, your empire, everything you've built for something so small and insignificant? Or would that be the bravest thing you could possibly do? Jung-ho made the call, his hands shaking slightly as he relayed the impossible message. Korea's most expensive veterinarian, who usually only treated racehorses and celebrity pets, was being summoned to the ghost's penthouse for an emergency at midnight on Christmas Eve. The drive was silent except for the puppy's labored breathing. The ghost sat in the back of his Mercedes, still holding the bundle, whispering things Jung-ho couldn't quite hear. It sounded like apologies, promises, things the ghost had never said to another living soul. The penthouse, usually pristine and cold as a museum, became a makeshift emergency room. The veterinarian arrived, shocked, confused, but too terrified of the ghost to ask questions. Within minutes, the puppy was on heated blankets, an IV drip restoring its tiny, dehydrated body. The vet worked frantically while the ghost stood over him like a sentinel, watching every movement with an intensity usually reserved for interrogations. Will it live? The question came out hoarse, almost breaking. The vet hesitated. In his world, bad news delivered to powerful men often meant bad outcomes for the messenger. The hypothermia is severe, the dehydration critical. If we'd arrived 10 minutes later, he let the sentence die. But we didn't. The ghost's voice was absolute. So, will it live? I'll do everything I can, sir. That's not an answer. Can you hear the desperation in those words? The way power and money suddenly mean nothing when what you want is beyond your control. The vet worked through the night. The ghost never left the puppy's side, even when Jung-ho suggested he rest, shower, change his ruined clothes. He just sat there, watching the small chest rise and fall, each breath a tiny victory against death. At 4 a.m, the puppy's eyes opened fully for the first time. Brown eyes, clear now, fixing on the ghost's face with something that looked almost like trust. And the ghost, the man who hadn't cried since he was 8 years old, who'd built an empire on the foundation of emotional emptiness, who'd convinced himself that tears were weakness, felt something hot trace down his scarred cheek. Jung-ho, standing in the doorway, witnessed it. The first tear in 30 years, falling on a puppy that should have died in a frozen alley. The ghost didn't wipe it away, didn't hide it, just let it fall, like surrendering to something he'd fought his entire life. Hanu, he whispered, the word barely audible. Sky, because during his childhood in the orphanage, the sky was the only thing that was free, the only thing that couldn't be taken away. The puppy, Hanu, made a soft sound, not quite a bark, almost like recognition. And in that moment, something shifted in the ghost's universe. Some fundamental law rewrote itself. But Jung-ho knew the truth that his boss didn't seem to grasp yet. In their world, showing your heart was painting a target on everything you loved. And by morning, every enemy and soul would know that the ghost had finally found something he cared more than power. The real question wasn't whether Hanul would survive the night, it was whether either of them would survive what came next. News traveled fast in Seoul's underworld. By noon the next day, the story had spread through every gang, every faction, every rival who'd spent years looking for a crack in the ghost's armor. The ghost of Gangnam stopped for a dying puppy, knelt in the snow, cried. In conference rooms and back alleys across the city, men who'd feared him for decades began to laugh, some nervously, not quite believing it, others with the hungry glee of sharks scenting blood. In a smoke-filled room in Itaewon, 3 rival bosses sat around a table. Park Dong-min, who'd lost half his territory to the ghosts 5 years ago, Choi Young-shik, whose brother the ghost had personally executed for betrayal, and Kim Tae-jin, the ambitious newcomer who'd been waiting for any sign of weakness. "Is it true?" Park asked, stubbing out his cigarette. "The ghost actually cried over a dog?" Choi leaned back, a smile playing on his lips. "My sources confirmed it, his own men's side. He's keeping the animal in his penthouse. Apparently, he paused for effect, attached. Here's a question that should terrify you. In a world where compassion is seen as weakness, is showing mercy an act of courage or a death sentence?" Kim laughed, young and arrogant. "The mighty ghost brought to his knees by a puppy. My grandmother showed more spine when she faced down a home invasion." "This is our moment," Park said, leaning forward. "He's distracted, vulnerable, human, everything we've needed him not to be." They began to plan, their voices low and eager, a coordinated strike, hit his operations simultaneously, force him to choose between protecting his empire and rushing home to his new, pet? Weakness? Soft spot. But what they didn't understand, what they couldn't understand because they'd never been abandoned, never felt utterly alone, was that the ghost wasn't weaker now, he was something far more dangerous, a man with something to protect. Meanwhile, in the ghost's organization, divisions spread like infection. Jung-ho stood in the security room with 3 other lieutenants, all of them watching footage from the alley, trying to make sense of what they'd seen. "He's lost it," muttered Min-soo, the head of operations. 30 years of perfect calculation thrown away for a stray dog? "It's not about the dog," Jung-ho said quietly, though he wasn't sure he believed his own words. "There's something else happening here." Yeah, Minsu snorted. He's going soft, and soft gets you killed in this business. How long before he starts showing mercy to our enemies, before he hesitates when he needs to pull a trigger? Would you follow a leader who suddenly started caring, or would you see it as betrayal of everything that kept you alive? But not everyone agreed. Seijin, the youngest lieutenant, spoke up hesitantly. Or maybe he's finally remembered what we're supposed to be protecting. I mean, what's the point of all this power if we're just dead inside, if we're no better than the monsters we fight against? The room went silent. That kind of talk was dangerous, philosophical weakness. The point, Minsu said coldly, is survival, and sentiment doesn't survive long in our world. Back in the penthouse, the ghost sat on his floor, his immaculate, expensive floor, playing with Hanel. The puppy was stronger now, stumbling around on unsteady legs, chewing on the ghost's finger with tiny teeth that couldn't possibly hurt, but somehow reached straight into his chest. "You're trouble," the ghost murmured, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. When was the last time he'd smiled? "You know that, right? Nothing but trouble." Hanel yapped, a sound so small and innocent it seemed impossible that it could shake an empire. But it had, and the tremors were spreading. The ghost's phone buzzed, a message from one of his informants. 3 rival bosses met today, Itaewon, 2 hours. They're planning something. He stared at the message, then at Hanel, then back at the message. The old ghost would have already been moving, already strategizing, already preparing to strike first and hardest, control the situation before it controlled you. But now there was this small life depending on him, this fragile thing that needed him in a way no one had needed him since he was a boy who needed his mother and she'd walked away anyway. Could he risk leaving Hanel alone? Could he risk bringing the battle to his home? Could he risk anything anymore now that he had something to lose? The question gnawed at him. When did caring about something become more terrifying than facing death? His phone buzzed again. Jung-ho, "Boss, we need to talk. There's movement, multiple fronts." The ghost stared at the message, then at Hadao, then back at the message. The old ghost would have already been moving, already strategizing, already preparing to strike first and hardest, control the situation before it controlled you. But now there was this small life depending on him, this fragile thing that needed him in a way no one had needed him since he was a boy who needed his mother and she'd walked away anyway. Could he risk leaving Hanel alone? Could he risk bringing the battle to his home? Could he risk anything anymore now that he had something to lose? The question gnawed at him. When did caring about something become more terrifying than facing death? His phone buzzed again. Jung-ho, "Boss, we need to talk. There's movement, multiple fronts." The ghost stared at the message, then at Hanel, then back at the message. The old ghost would have already been moving, already strategizing, already preparing to strike first and hardest, control the situation before it controlled you. But now there was this small life depending on him, this fragile thing that needed him in a way no one had needed him since he was a boy who needed his mother and she'd walked away anyway. Could he risk leaving Hanel alone? Could he risk bringing the battle to his home? Could he risk anything anymore now that he had something to lose? The question gnawed at him. When did caring about something become more terrifying than facing death? His phone buzzed again. Jung-ho, "Boss, we need to talk. There's movement, multiple fronts." The ghost stared at the message, then at Hanel, then back at the message. The old ghost would have already been moving, already strategizing, already preparing to strike first and hardest, control the situation before it controlled you. But now there was this small life depending on him, this fragile thing that needed him in a way no one had needed him since he was a boy who needed his mother and she'd walked away anyway. Could he risk leaving Hanel alone? Could he risk bringing the battle to his home? Could he risk anything anymore now that he had something to lose? The question gnawed at him. When did caring about something become more terrifying than facing death? His phone buzzed again. Jung-ho, "Boss, we need to talk. There's movement, multiple fronts." The ghost stared at the message, then at Hanel, then back at the message. The ambush came 3 days later, fast and brutal, exactly as they'd planned it. The ghost was inspecting one of his nightclubs in Hongdae when the first shots rang out. Glass shattered. People screamed. His security detail immediately surrounded him, but he could see it in their movements. This wasn't random. This was coordinated, professional. 8 men, heavily armed, blocking every exit. They'd done their homework, studied his patterns, waited for the moment when he'd be furthest from home, furthest from Hanel. The thought hit him like electricity. The puppy was alone in his penthouse with just 2 guards who wouldn't expect an attack there, who wouldn't be prepared if this was just a distraction. What would you choose, your empire or the one innocent thing you've sworn to protect? "Boss, we need to move," Jung-ho started, but the ghost was already moving, not toward cover, but toward the exit, toward his car, toward home. A bullet whipped past his ear, so close he felt the heat. Another shattered the wall beside his head. His men returned fire, creating a corridor of chaos, but all the ghost could think was, how long does it take to get to the penthouse? 12 minutes in traffic, 8 if I run every light. "Boss," Jung-ho grabbed his arm, "you can't just get me to my car, now." The ghost's voice was ice, but underneath, Jung-ho heard something new. Panic, raw, undisguised panic. They fought their way out, leaving 2 attackers dead, one of his own men wounded. The ghost barely registered it. He was in his car, engine roaring, phone pressed to his ear. Penthouse security, status, static. Then, "All clear, boss. The dog is..." The line went dead. His heart, that organ he'd convinced himself was just scar tissue, stopped. He ran 4 red lights, took corners at speeds that had Jung-ho gripping the dashboard, his knuckles white on the steering wheel, jaw clenched so tight it ached. Please, please, please. He didn't even know who he was praying to. He'd stopped believing in God the day his mother left him in the snow, but now, racing through Seoul's streets, he found himself bargaining with any force that might be listening. "Take anything, my money, my empire, my life. Just don't touch Hanel." When did the hunter become the one running scared? He burst through his penthouse door with Jung-ho at his heels, gun drawn, expecting the worst. What he found was worse than he'd imagined, and nothing like it at the same time. His 2 guards were unconscious, not dead, tied up. Professional work. The penthouse ransacked, but not robbed. They'd been looking for something specific, and in the center of his living room, surrounded by overturned furniture, was Hanel, unharmed, shaking with fear, but alive. The ghost dropped to his knees hard he'd have bruises, gathered the trembling puppy into his arms, felt the small heart racing against his palm, proof of life, proof of mercy he didn't deserve. "Shh, shh, I'm here, I've got you." His voice cracked. When was the last time his voice cracked? Jung-ho was checking the guards, his face grim. "They're alive, but they were drugged. This was a message, boss. They could have killed everyone, but they didn't." A message. The ghost understood immediately. "We know what you love. We know where to hurt you, and next time we won't be so merciful." Hanel whimpered against his chest, and something inside the ghost transformed, not hardened, something else, something molten and fierce and utterly unstoppable. The old ghost would have responded with cold calculation, would have already been planning retribution, measuring responses, controlling every variable. But the man holding a traumatized puppy in his arms wasn't the old ghost anymore. "Get me their location," he said quietly, too quietly. Jung-ho had heard that tone once before, years ago, right before the ghost had dismantled an entire rival organization in a single night. Boss, we should think about this strategically. Their location, now. Do you hear it? The difference between cold rage and hot fury, between revenge and protection. 3 hours later, the ghost walked into the warehouse where Park, Choi, and Kim were celebrating their successful warning. They didn't hear him coming, didn't sense him until he was already there, standing in the doorway like death incarnate. But something was different. His eyes weren't dead anymore. They burned. "You made a mistake," the ghost said, his voice carrying across the warehouse. Park reached for his gun, but 3 of his own men the ghost had secretly paid double years ago just in case, turned their weapons on him instead. "You thought my compassion made me weak. You thought caring about something made me vulnerable, and maybe you're right. Maybe it does." He stopped in front of them, close enough that they could see something in his expression they'd never seen before. Not anger, purpose. But here's what you didn't understand. A man with nothing to lose is dangerous, but a man with something to protect? He smiled, and it was terrifying. He's unstoppable. Kim lunged with a knife. The ghost disarmed him in 2 moves, fast and brutal and precise. But he didn't kill him, not even seriously injure him. He just looked at all 3 of them and said, "The old ghost would have killed you here, made an example, left your bodies as a warning." He turned to walk away. But that ghost is dead. Someone else is here now. Someone who's learned that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about what you choose to protect when you do. He paused at the door. "Go. Tell everyone in Seoul, the ghost isn't gone, he's evolved, and the next person who threatens what I love won't get mercy. They'll get something much worse." "What's worse than death?" Choi spat, trying to save face. The ghost looked back, and his smile was arctic. "Living with the knowledge that you could have killed me, and you chose mercy instead. Living every day knowing you missed your shot. That's worse than death. That's regret." He left them alive, left them with their shame and their failure and the dawning understanding that they'd fundamentally misunderstood what they were facing. On the drive home, Jung-ho finally spoke. "Boss, that was either genius or suicide. I can't tell which." The ghost looked out the window at Seoul's glittering lights, thinking about a small puppy waiting for him at home. "Neither can I," he admitted. "But I'm tired of pretending to be a ghost. Maybe it's time to try being human. And if being human gets you killed?" The ghost's hand unconsciously touched his chest, where Hanel's heartbeat had thrummed against his palm. "Then at least I'll die having felt something. That's more I've had in 30 years. What scares you more, dying while feeling nothing, or living while feeling everything?" The nightmares started 3 weeks after he saved Hanul. Min-jae would wake at 3 a.m., drenched in sweat, his hands reaching for something that wasn't there. A jacket, a warmth, a presence that had died in a gang fight 30 years ago. The boy who'd saved him on those orphanage steps. The boy whose name he'd carved into his memory like a scar, Kim Jun-ho. Hanul would sense it immediately, padding across the silk sheets to press his small body against Min-jae's chest, whining softly until the trembling stopped. "I'm fine," Min-jae would whisper, running his fingers through the puppy's fur, but they both knew he was lying. The thing about breaking open a frozen heart, once the ice cracks, everything beneath comes flooding out. It started small, a scent that triggered memory. The way snow fell past his penthouse windows, each flake spiraling down like the night his mother left him. The sound of children laughing in the street below, and suddenly he was 8 again, watching other boys get picked up after school while he waited on those cold steps, hoping she'd come back. She never did. His second-in-command, Choi Sung-ho, noticed first, found Min-jae standing at the window at dawn, Hanul asleep in his arms, staring at something only he could see. "Boss?" Sung-ho's voice was careful. The meeting with the Busan syndicate? Cancel it. Silence. Min Jae never canceled meetings. Sir? I said cancel it. Min Jae turned, and Sung-ho saw something in his boss's eyes that made his blood run cold. Not anger, but something worse. Absence. Like the ghost was disappearing into someone else entirely. I need to go somewhere. Where? Min Jae looked down at Hanul, who stirred but didn't wake. Somewhere I should have gone 30 years ago. The songbook orphanage still stood, though barely. Crumbling brick, peeling paint, a playground that had rusted into skeletal sculpture. The gate creaked when Min Jae pushed it open, Hanul trotting beside him on a leash, curious and unafraid. 20 boys called this place home now. 20 boys who might grow up to be ghosts like him, or worse. The director, an old woman whose face Min Jae almost remembered, looked up from her paperwork as he entered. Her eyes widened in recognition, then calculation. Everyone in Seoul knew that face. Kang Min Jae? Little Min Jae? The name hit him like a fist. Little Min Jae, the boy who'd cried himself to sleep every night for 2 years. The boy who'd stopped crying when Junho died, because what was the point? Crying didn't bring anyone back. I want to see the records, he said quietly, from 1993, December. She knew better to refuse him. The file was thin, painfully thin, as if his entire childhood could be summarized in 10 pages of bureaucratic notes. Abandoned by mother, Lee Hae-won, December 18, 1993. Reason, financial hardship. No father listed. Child exhibits signs of trauma, selective mutism, night terrors, aggressive behavior toward other children. His hands didn't shake. They never shook. But Hanul pressed against his leg, sensing something, and Min Jae's vision blurred at the edges. There was a photo, him at 8 years old, staring at the camera with eyes already too old, too cold, too knowing. A boy who'd learned that love was conditional and people left, and the only person you could trust was yourself. And below it, another photo, Kim Jun-ho, 12 years old, smiling despite the bruises on his face, despite the system that had failed him too. The boy who'd given his jacket to a crying stranger and sat with him through the longest night of his life. Deceased, May 2nd, 1996. Gang-related violence. Min Jae stood there for a long time, staring at Junho's smile, remembering. Mr. Kang? The director's voice was soft. Why are you here? He looked down at Hanul, who looked back with absolute trust, the same trust Junho had once shown him, that the world could be cruel, but that didn't mean you had to be. I'm here to make a donation, Min Jae said finally. A large one, enough to rebuild this place. New beds, new playground, therapy for every child, education funds, whatever they need. The director's jaw dropped. Mr. Kang, that's millions. He knows what it costs. Min Jae's voice was steel wrapped in something softer. And I want one more thing. Anything. I want Junho's grave location. He paused, his throat tight. I never got to thank him. But his enemies were watching, always watching. Park Dong-min, head of the rival Incheon faction, received the surveillance photos that afternoon. Min Jae at the orphanage, Min Jae visiting a grave, Min Jae kneeling in the dirt with a puppy beside him, his head bowed, his lips moving in what could only be prayer. Dong-min smiled, a shark's smile, cold and calculating. So, the ghost has a past, and more importantly, he tapped the photo of Min Jae at the grave, he has guilt. How does that help us? One lieutenant asked. Because guilt makes you stupid. It makes you emotional. It makes you think you can fix things that are broken. Dong-min lit a cigarette, exhaling smoke toward the ceiling. I need another photo. This one showed a woman in a small apartment in Guangzhou. Older, worn by life, her face haunted by choices made decades ago. Lee Hae-won, Min Jae's mother. "Find her," Dong-min ordered. "Bring her to Seoul. Let's see what happens when the ghost meets the woman who made him." Meanwhile, inside Min Jae's own organization, the cracks were spreading. Han Ji-soo, his finance director, and a man who'd been with him for 15 years, sat in an unmarked car across from Min Jae's penthouse, watching. His phone buzzed. "Do you have it?" The text was from an unknown number, but Ji-soo knew who it was, Dong-min's people. He typed back, "Schedule, security codes, everything, but I need assurances. You'll be taken care of. Once the ghost is gone, the organization will need new leadership, someone who understands that business is business, not a charity." Jisoo's jaw clenched. He'd watched Min Jae change, watched the most feared man in Seoul go soft over a dog, watched him waste millions on orphanages and shelters and anonymous good deeds that did nothing for the bottom line. The old ghost would never have allowed this. The old ghost understood that in their world, compassion was suicide. So yes, he was betraying him. Not for money, though the payment would be substantial, but because he believed, truly believed, that he was saving the organization from its leader's weakness. He typed, "When?" "Soon. We're bringing in his past. Once he's broken emotionally, we strike physically. He won't see it coming." Jisoo watched as Min Jae's lights went on in the penthouse, saw his silhouette in the window, Hanul visible beside him. He felt a twinge of guilt, but he buried it. Guilt was weakness, and in their world, the weak didn't survive. "I'm ready," he sent. That night, Min Jae couldn't sleep. He sat on his balcony, Hanul curled in his lap, staring at Seoul's glittering skyline. The city he'd conquered, the empire he'd built from nothing. All of it felt suddenly fragile, like ice waiting to crack. His phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. He almost deleted it. Almost, but something made him open it. Inside was a single photo, old, grainy, but unmistakable. His mother, Lee Hae-won, taken yesterday based on the date stamp. Below it, a message. "The past is never really buried, is it? Let's talk about your mother, Min Jae. Let's talk about all the things you've been running from." Min Jae's blood turned to ice water. Hanul whined, sensing the sudden tension in his body, but Min Jae couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in his ears. They'd found her. After 32 years, after he'd spent decades not looking because he'd told himself he didn't care, they'd found her, and they were going to use her to destroy him. His phone rang, unknown number. He answered. "Hello, Ghost." Dong-min's voice was smooth, pleased. Or should I say, Little Min Jae? The meeting was set for midnight, neutral ground. An abandoned warehouse in Yongsan that had once been used for smuggling operations before Min Jae had shut it down. Now it was empty, hollow, a perfect place for ghosts. Sung-ho begged him not to go. "Boss, it's a trap. They have your mother, fine, but walking in there alone?" "I won't be alone." Min Jae fastened his watch, checked his gun, his movements calm and precise. The ghost was back, at least on the surface. "You and a team will be on standby, 2 blocks out. At the first sign of trouble, you'll be dead before we can reach you." Min Jae met his second-in-command's eyes. "Then I'll be dead, but I need to see her, Sung-ho. I need—" He paused, his jaw clenching. "I need to know why. Why she left? Boss, does it matter? It was 30 years. It matters to the boy who froze on those steps." Min Jae's voice cracked just slightly. "It matters to every version of me that learned to stop feeling because feeling hurt too much. It matters because—" He looked at Hanel, sleeping peacefully in his bed. "Because I saved that puppy, and I don't know if I did it for him or for the boy I used to be, and I need to know if I can look at her and not feel anything. If I can prove that I'm not that child anymore." Sung-ho was quiet for a long moment. Then, "And if you look at her and do feel something?" Min-jae smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then I'm already broken, and they've won." She looked older, so much older than he remembered. Lee Hae-won sat in a chair in the center of the warehouse, her hands unbound but her face pale with fear. Dong-min stood beside her, smoking casually, his men positioned throughout the space. Min-jae counted 12, all armed, but Min-jae only had eyes for her. 32 years. 32 years since she'd walked away, her back straight, her sobs muffled, leaving him in the snow. 32 years since the world taught him that love was a lie, and people were temporary, and trust would get you killed. "Min-jae?" Her voice was hoarse, broken. "Oh my God, Min-jae, you're alive?" His voice was cold, empty. The ghost in full force. Disappointed? No, Tears streamed down her face. "I looked for you. Years later, when I got back on my feet, I looked, but the orphanage wouldn't tell me where you'd gone, and I heard rumors about a boy in the gangs, and I prayed it wasn't you, but it was." He stepped closer, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. Dong-min watched with barely concealed delight. "I was 12 when the gangs found me, 15 when I killed for the first time, 25 when I took over my first territory. Do you know what I thought about all those years?" She shook her head, sobbing. "Nothing." The word was brutal. "I didn't think about you at all, because thinking about you meant remembering what it felt like to be abandoned, and I couldn't afford to feel that. I couldn't afford to feel anything." "I'm sorry," she wept. "I was young, I was broke. Your father left and I couldn't. I thought you'd have a better life without me. I thought—" "You thought wrong." Min-jae's voice was ice and razors. "But you're here now, so tell me, mother." The word dripped with venom. "What do you want? Money? Protection? Or are you just here because he gestured to Dong-min, dragged you here to break me?" Dong-min laughed, flicking his cigarette aside. "Oh, this is beautiful. The ghost has feelings. The ghost has trauma." He turned to his men. "Do you see? This is why emotions make you weak, because now—" He pulled out a gun, pressed it to Lee Hae-won's head. "Now I can make you do whatever I want. Transfer your territories, sign over your operations, disband your organization, or—" He cocked the hammer. "I redecorate this warehouse with your mother's brain matter." Silence. Min-jae stood perfectly still, his face unreadable. Inside, the boy was screaming. The 8-year-old who'd been left in the snow was begging him to save her, to prove that he was different, that he could protect people now, that he wasn't helpless anymore. But the ghost knew this was the moment, the test. Show weakness now, and Dong-men would exploit it forever. Every enemy would learn that Kang Min-jae could be controlled through emotion. He'd be finished. His mother looked at him with desperate, pleading eyes. "Min-jae, please!" "Do it," he said quietly. The warehouse erupted in shocked silence. Dong-min blinked. "What?" "I said, do it." Min-jae's voice was flat, emotionless, the ghost in totality. "Pull the trigger. Kill her. Because you're right, she's my past, and I don't live in the past anymore." "You're bluffing." "Am I?" Min-jae tilted his head slightly. "You wanted to break me by showing me my mother. You wanted me to feel something. But you made a mistake, Dong-min. You assumed I was like other men, that family mattered, that blood meant something." He stepped closer, and something in his eyes made Dong-min's finger loosen on the trigger. "I am the ghost of Gangnam. I built my empire on corpses, and if you think one more body, even hers, will change that?" Min-jae's smile was terrible. "Then you never understood me at all." Lee Hae-won's sobs filled the warehouse. Dong-min's hand trembled. this wasn't how it was supposed to go. The ghost was supposed to break, was supposed to beg, was supposed to prove that his transformation was real, that the puppy had made him soft. But instead, "Last chance," Min-jae said softly. "Kill her and start a war you can't win, or let her go and walk away with your life. Choose." The standoff stretched, seconds that felt like hours. Then Dongmin lowered the gun. "This isn't over," he snarled. "It never is." Min-jae turned his back, a calculated insult, and walked toward the exit. "Sung-ho, extract the package. Make sure she gets medical attention and a hotel room, far from here." "Boss," Sung-ho's voice came through his earpiece. "Are you—" "Do it." Min-jae walked out into the night, leaving his mother's cries behind him. He made it 3 blocks before he collapsed. Not physically. Physically, he was fine. But mentally, spiritually, in every way that mattered, he shattered. His knees hit the pavement in an alley. His breath came in ragged gasps. His hands shook so violently he couldn't form fists. He'd just told a man to kill his mother, had meant it, had been willing to let her die to maintain his reputation, to prove he was still the ghost, to show that emotions couldn't control him. And the worst part? It had worked. He'd won. Dongmin had backed down. The test was passed. But at what cost? "What am I?" he whispered to the empty alley. "What the fuck have I become?" His phone buzzed. A message from Sung-ho. "She's asking for you. Says she understands. Says she's proud you survived." Min-jae read it 3 times, 4, 5. Then he threw his phone against the wall, watching it shatter. He'd survived. He'd built an empire. He'd become the ghost. But somewhere along the way, he'd also become the exact thing he'd hated most. Someone who could abandon people without flinching. Someone who could walk away from someone begging for mercy. Someone who could leave a crying child in the snow. When he finally returned to his penthouse, hours later, after walking Seoul's streets in a daze, Hanel was waiting by the door. The puppy barked once, sharp and insistent, then growled. Min-jae stopped, confused. "Hanel?" But Hanel kept growling, his small body tense, his eyes fixed on something behind Min-jae. Min-jae turned. Too late. The knife caught him in the side, blade sliding between ribs with practiced precision. Min-jae stumbled, his training taking over even as shock flooded his system. He spun, his elbow connecting with his attacker's face, buying him space. Han Ji-soo stood in Min-jae's penthouse, holding a bloody knife, his face twisted with rage and righteousness. "You've gone soft. Tonight proved it. The old ghost would never have walked into that meeting, would never have let emotions control him, would never have wasted time and money on dogs and orphans, and all this," he gestured wildly, "this weakness." Min-jae pressed his hand to his side, blood seeping between his fingers. "Jisoo, what did you do?" "What I had to do," Jisoo's voice cracked. "I sold your schedule to Dongmin, your security codes, everything, because someone needs to save this organization from your suicide. And if you won't be the ghost anymore—" He lunged again, but Hanel was faster. The puppy launched himself at Jisoo's leg, teeth sinking into flesh, small body fierce with protective rage. Jisoo screamed, stumbling, and Min-jae moved despite his wound, disarming him with brutal efficiency. The knife clattered to the floor. Jisoo fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face, trapped between what he'd believed and what he'd done. "Why?" Jisoo whispered. "Why save the puppy? Why change everything? Why throw away everything you built?" Min-jae looked at Hanel, at those trusting eyes, at the small creature that had reminded him he was human. "Because being the ghost was killing me, slower than any knife, but just as surely. And I didn't even realize I was dying until I held something innocent in my hands and remembered what it felt like to care if something lived or died." He coughed, tasting blood. You think emotions make you weak, Jisoo, but tonight, emotions are the only reason I'm still alive. Because Hanel sensed danger, because he protected me, because I've spent weeks building trust with a creature that has every reason to fear humans, and he chose to save me anyway. Sirens in the distance, his team arriving. The ghost couldn't have survived tonight, because the ghost was already dead inside. He just didn't know it yet. The attack came 3 hours later, while Min-jae was in surgery. Dong-min had been waiting for this, the moment of maximum weakness. His men hit 3 locations simultaneously: Min-jae's nightclub, his main warehouse, and the veterinary clinic where Hanel's medical records were kept. The message was clear. You rejected the past, so we'll destroy your present and your future. Sung-ho got the call while sitting in the hospital waiting room, Hanel asleep in a carrier beside him. They hit us hard, his lieutenant reported, voice tight. The club's on fire, the warehouse is being looted, and sir, a pause. They got Dr. Yoon, took her from the clinic, left a message. They want the dog in exchange for her life. Sung-ho looked down at Hanel, at the puppy that had changed everything. What do we do? His lieutenant asked. Boss is in surgery. We can't make this call without him. But Sung-ho knew what Min-jae would say, knew it in his bones. We don't trade lives, Sung-ho said firmly. We get her back, all of her, and we end this tonight. How? We're outnumbered, outpositioned, and our boss is... Our boss, Sung-ho interrupted, taught me something these past few weeks. He taught me that being willing to lose everything is what makes you dangerous, because when you have something to protect, you don't fight to win, you fight to annihilate anything that threatens it. He stood, Hanel's carrier in hand. Call everyone, every soldier, every associate, everyone who's ever owed the boss a favor. Tell them the ghost isn't dead, he's evolved, and tonight, we show Dong-min what happens when you threaten the things we love. Min-jae woke to chaos. The surgery had been successful. The knife had missed major organs by millimeters, but his body was weak, his sides screaming with every breath. The doctor was shouting about bed rest and recovery time. Min-jae was already pulling out his IV. Sir, you can't. Where's Sung-ho? Min-jae's voice was rough but commanding. Where's Hanel? A nurse tried to stop him. He gently but firmly moved her aside, stumbling toward the door. Every step was agony. Every breath felt like swallowing glass. But Ji-yu was missing. His organization was under attack, and somewhere in Seoul, Dong-min was making his final play. Sung-ho found him in the hallway, half-dressed in hospital scrubs, blood seeping through his bandages. Boss, what the hell? Status. One word, commanding despite his condition. Sung-ho's face was grim. They took Dr. Yoon. They want Hanel in exchange. The club's destroyed. The warehouse compromised. We're gathering forces, but I'm supposed to be in surgery? Min-jae finished. He looked at his second in command, really looked at him. You were going after her anyway, weren't you? Even without me. Someone taught me that compassion isn't weakness. Sung-ho handed him a jacket. Now let me teach you something. You don't have to do this alone anymore. You have people who'd follow you into hell, not because they fear you, because they believe in you. Min-jae took the jacket, his throat tight. Where is he? Hanel? Safe, with our most trusted guards. But boss, Sung-ho hesitated. Dong-min has Dr. Yoon at the old Incheon docks, same place where Junho died. It's not a coincidence. Of course it wasn't. Dong-min wanted to break him completely, wanted him to face his past while his present burned and his future was held hostage. The old ghost would have calculated odds, would have made the cold choice, would have sacrificed the peace to save the board. But Min-jae wasn't the old ghost anymore. Gather everyone, he said quietly. Every soldier, every asset, every favor we're owed. We're going to the docks. We're getting her back, and we're ending this tonight. "Boss, you can barely stand." "I don't need to stand." Min-jae's eyes were steel and fire. "I need to finish this. For Hanel, for Ji-yu, for every person who's believed that I could be something more than the monster I was." He started toward the exit, each step a battle. "And Sung-ho," he glanced back, "bring Hanel." "Sir? If I'm going to face my past, I need my future with me. I need him to remind me who I'm fighting for, who I've become." Sung-ho nodded slowly. "The men are going to follow you into hell tonight, boss. You know that, right?" Min-jae smiled, and for once it reached his eyes. "Then let's make sure we all come back, because I'm done with ghosts. Time to live like a human being." The Incheon docks at 3 a.m. were a graveyard of shipping containers and forgotten dreams. Dongmin had chosen his ground well. Open spaces, multiple sightlines, his men positioned throughout, at least 40 soldiers visible, probably more hidden. And at the center, was tied to a chair on the main pier, was Ji-yu. She was alive, bruised but alive. Her eyes found Min-jae's as his convoy arrived, and something passed between them. Fear, yes, but also a fierce determination that made his heart clench. Min-jae stepped out of the lead car, Hanel in his arms, his wound barely contained by fresh bandages beneath his suit. His men fanned out behind him, 30 soldiers, the best he had, outnumbered but not outmatched. Dongmin emerged from behind a container, applauding slowly. "The ghost rises from surgery. I'm impressed. Stupid, but impressed." His smile was cruel. "So let's talk terms. The dog for the vet. Simple trade." "No trade," Min-jae said calmly. He set Hanel down gently. The puppy stayed close but didn't run. Absolute trust. "I'm taking her, and you're going to let me." Dongmin laughed. "Or what, you'll shoot your way through 40 men while bleeding out, while protecting a puppy and a hostage? The math doesn't work, ghost." "You're right, the math doesn't work, for a ghost, but I told you, I'm not the ghost anymore." He raised his hand. Lights flooded the docks, dozens of vehicles, hundreds of men, not just Min-jae's organization, others, smaller gangs, independent operators, even some of Dongmin's own people, their faces set with determination. Sung-ho stepped beside his boss, speaking into a megaphone. "Over the past month, these people all received something from our boss: money for orphanages, protection for their families, medicine for sick children, jobs for those who wanted out of the life. He helped them without asking for anything in return, and tonight, they're here to return the favor." Dongmin's face went white. "You can't. This isn't how it works. This is business. This is what happens when you remember that people aren't just assets, they're human beings. And human beings remember kindness. They repay loyalty. They fight for people who fought for them." He walked forward, slowly, deliberately, Hanel at his heels. Every step was agony, but he didn't falter. "You wanted to destroy me by using my past, but you didn't realize my past isn't my weakness anymore. It's my strength. Because I know what it's like to be abandoned, to be left in the cold, to be treated like trash." He was close now, close enough to see the fear in Dongmin's eyes. "And I swore I'd never make anyone feel that way again, even if it cost me everything, even if it made me weak, because I learned something these past few weeks. Strength isn't about how much pain you can cause. It's about how much you're willing to endure to protect what matters." Dongmin pulled a gun, pressed it to his own lieutenant's head. "I'll kill him. I'll kill my own people if you don't." "Then you've already lost," Min-jae said simply. "Because that's what I would have done. 3 months ago, the old ghost would have sacrificed anyone to win. But I'm not him anymore." He turned to Dongmin's soldiers, the ones who hadn't run, who stood uncertain and afraid. "You don't have to follow him. You don't have to die for a man who'd use you as shields. There's another way, a better way, and I'm offering it to you now. Work for me, and I'll treat you like human beings, like people who matter. Or stay with him and learn what I learned 30 years ago, that loyalty to monsters only makes you a victim." Silence. Then, one by one, Dongmin's soldiers lowered their weapons. "No!" Dongmin screamed. "No, this isn't. You can't." But the docks were already moving, Min Jae's people securing the area, Sung-ho cutting Ji-yu free, Hanel barking once, sharp and victorious. Dongmin stood alone, his empire crumbling in real time. Min Jae walked past him, didn't even look back. "You're finished. Leave Seoul tonight. If I see you again, I won't show mercy. Not because I'm the ghost, but because you threaten the people I love. And that's unforgivable." He reached Ji-woo. She was crying, trembling, but alive. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I never meant to put you in danger." "Shut up," she whispered, then threw her arms around him, careful of his wound. "Shut up and don't ever make me think you're not coming back." Min Jae held her with one arm, his other hand resting on Hanul's head. For the first time in 30 years, surrounded by violence and danger and the ruins of his old life, he felt something he'd never felt before: peace. The aftermath took weeks to sort out. Dongmin fled Seoul, Ji-soo went to prison, cooperating fully once he understood the depth of his betrayal. Min Jae's organization underwent a transformation, not soft, but different, strategic, human. His mother reached out once more, a letter, not a visit, apologizing, explaining, asking nothing. Min Jae wrote 3 times, then carefully filed it away. Maybe someday he'd respond, maybe not, but the rage was gone. The desperate need for answers had faded. He'd found something more important than closure. He'd found peace with his past, not forgiveness, not forgetting, but acceptance. One night, a month after the docks, Min Jae sat on his balcony with Hanul, now growing rapidly, no longer a puppy but an adolescent dog with fierce loyalty and gentle eyes. Ji-woo was there too. They'd grown closer, carefully, both aware of the danger but unable to deny the connection. She leaned against his uninjured side, her hand resting on Hanul's back. "Do you regret it?" she asked quietly. "Saving him? Everything that came after?" Min Jae was quiet for a long time, watching Seoul's lights glitter in the darkness. "Every day," he admitted. "I regret that I waited so long, that I let 30 years pass before I remembered what it felt like to be human, that it took a dying puppy to remind me."